You're listening to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please join us on Patreon.
You are listening to Paris Underground Radio. My name is Annette Delou, and I am the host of The Heart of You. Hello, and welcome back to The Heart of You. You are listening to episode 29. And today we are going to talk to Ally McDonald-Bull, who is a facilitator for Cacao Ceremonies, a human design reader, multidisciplined wellness coach who specializes in Pilates and women's wellness. We're really excited to speak to Ally today because cacao ceremonies are becoming increasingly more popular. I'm especially seeing them all over Paris nowadays, where it's something that I have been super curious and I've been wanting to know more about them. And I just so happened to meet Ally on the Women Living in Paris group on Facebook. Ally, I would love to welcome you to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to have this conversation all about cacao.
Me too. Just as a little background, why don't you give our listeners a little history of maybe how you came to Paris and what your spiritual awakening kind of looks like?
Yes, sure. So I was actually born in Paris, but I did not grow up here. I grew up in the UK and in New Zealand. And when I was just about to turn 27, I decided it was time to go on an adventure. And so I left New Zealand and I booked a one-way ticket over to Europe. And I thought that I was going to come back to the UK and do something new. I think I was searching for something slightly different, to something, or maybe that still was sort of what I had been doing in New Zealand, but I was looking for something more. I believe that there was something more I was searching for in life. And so I think being a British citizen, I felt like, well, it's easy to go back over to the UK. But there was something about Paris that I think, because I was born here and I always felt I had this connection, that sparked my curiosity. And in the end, I got a position as an au pair and I moved over here. And the au pair job only lasted 5 weeks. And that really was, I that's another story. But I see it as being the means that brought me here, because it gave me the confidence actually to move here. Because as anyone will know, moving to Paris is not the easiest thing.
It is not. Absolutely.
It really is not. And this provided me with somewhere to live, some income. I didn't need a visa at the time, but it provided me with an address, which meant I could, do bank account and all that sort of lovely administration stuff that is important and very much part of living in Paris. Anyway, the job didn't quite work out, but it served its purpose. And after that, I guess the real living started here. And so this was in September 2018 when I actually arrived here. And after that, I ended up, so beforehand in New Zealand, I was working as a Pilates and dance fitness instructor, and I was a wellness coach. And I've always been a chocoholic. I'll sort of throw that in there because we'll come back to this theme of chocolate, I guess.
Because that is an important bit right there, right?
It is very important. It is very important. And I ended up, and this is again, as I just feel is a classic example of, all the plans not going to plan, and then the universe being like, this because this was meant for you sort of thing. So I ended up just by chance stumbling upon a dance fitness studio in Paris, and I wasn't actually looking for a job at the time. This was was right before everything sort of went a bit like, with the au pair job. But I got offered a job anyway. And like I said before, I didn't really think that I had come to Paris or had moved away from New Zealand to, I guess, do what I'd been doing in New Zealand. So I was a little bit like, I don't know about that. I kind of felt like I was going to do something different. And I actually thought I was going to do something with chocolate. But then with the au pair job like not going well, I decided, you know what, I think it would be good to explore this dance fitness option a bit more. And a long story short, within a few months, I started teaching regularly at the studio. I found some other jobs teaching Pilates, and I got back into I guess my bread and butter money coming from Pilates and wellness type activities. And that was a real adventure. I learned how to do my job in French. I met a lot of people in my classes who then later on became my friends. It was like, I'll give you a good workout and then be my friend. And meanwhile, I was also enjoying the wonderful chocolate that was on offer in Paris and in Europe. But I did feel like there was something sort of missing. And I remember that first winter I was there, I got quite ill actually. We shouldn't talk about viruses, but I got a virus. This was a year before COVID though, it wasn't COVID. I got this really bad virus that meant that I was bedbound for over a week, and I was by myself living in this 10 square meter, what's called a chambre de bonne, which is basically where servants used to live, and now students or people who don't want to spend much money or can't spend much money on rent live. And I just remember just staring at the ceiling, feeling obviously physically not great, but mentally just being like, oh, I'm so confused because I've come here and I've set up my life, yet I still feel the sense of emptiness. And I thought, what I really want to do is set up a hot chocolate club, because I don't drink coffee, and I feel like this is a common way that people tend to meet up is through coffee culture, cafe culture. And I was like, where's the hot chocolate club at? Because there really should be one. There really should be one. And I should say at this point, I knew nothing about cacao ceremony, any of the origins of that. I knew sort of the history of chocolate, but I didn't really know any of the sort of significance of it, or I guess what then I learned the spiritual context of it. Basically, over the next year, I traveled a lot with work, and I was setting up things. I was meeting people, and I found that, a lot of people also moved to Paris to sort of find themselves, if you like. I think it's a very good city for that. But I think people also were feeling quite lost, because like myself, finding yourself is a lonely journey. And I really kept coming back to this idea of creating this sort of community, which for me, I just wanted to have around a hot chocolate. Yeah, and then so now we're in 2019, October time, I ended up going to Mexico, and I actually taught over there. I was only there for a few days.
You were teaching Pilates over there?
Yes, I was teaching Pilates. I was teaching Pilates there. And again, this was like just a very chance sort of opportunity that came my way. And while I was there, I enjoyed these very different hot chocolates, or I should say hot cacaos, that were very different to the very equally as wonderful, but very different and very indulgent hot chocolates that we have here in Europe, which was more than 100% cacao, maybe mixed in with a few spices or plant milk or just with water. And I really loved this. It felt like I was drinking something really good for me as well. And I started to get really curious about cacao. And I came back to Paris, and I actually did then set up my little hot chocolate club, which to start with, I called Rendezvous Chocolat Chaud, which translates to hot chocolate appointment. And I was creating these small little meetups with people in Paris who also wanted to connect with other people who were interested in wellness, maybe who were on a bit of a wellness journey themselves. Most people weren't from Paris, so we also were exchanging stories about how we'd come to Paris and all the things that I guess connect us to each other. That was really kind of starting to become a thing, I guess. But then, COVID happened. A few other things were going on in Paris. We had transport strikes and all sorts of things that made it quite difficult for people to come along.
Yeah, that was actually the time frame that I moved here. So yeah, I completely understand.
It was a really great time. There was lots of complications, lots of complications indeed. I actually ended up going backwards and forwards from New Zealand, which is sort of quite crazy when I think about it now. Throughout the pandemic, I went to New Zealand twice, which definitely wasn't easy, especially with the country then closing its border, which has only just recently opened. But that's the way I decided to spend the pandemic, finding myself. And I think because COVID interrupted quite a lot of my projects, my plans, my dreams with my work, whether it was teaching internationally or hosting events or retreats, and then bringing people together, like in my hot chocolate club. All these things weren't allowed. So it was then I needed this sort of real reset. And so I went back to New Zealand and I sat with myself. And that was difficult. And I guess that is what I would then say became my spiritual awakening, which also coincided with my Saturn return. I've recently turned 30, but COVID occurred during my Saturn return. So very, very turbulent. I often refer to it feeling like a whole lot of plates were just smashing on the floor around me. This is when I started to delve into practices and concepts that I'd been curious about for a while, such as human design, which then led me to then train to read other people's, because I got so much out of it. And then I was really getting into my cacao just by myself because we still weren't allowed to do anything with other people. And when I was in New Zealand, I discovered this company that also did a cacao facilitator training. My whole body just was like, this sounds like something that's for you, because I was getting a lot of no's. I was getting a lot of, no, you can't do that right now, or no, this isn't you anymore. Or coming back to New Zealand also was a lot of like, oh, I don't know if I belong here. So a lot of, like I said, it was tricky. And I also wanted to come back to Paris. I think in my heart, I knew that I really was meant to be in Paris, but I also was a bit unsure as to what I was doing. And I wanted to keep some of the things I was doing, but start new things, but I didn't know what they were. So it was.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Paris is an interestingly supportive city when you are trying to find yourself, like you said. Like, it really sort of offers up that energetic space for you to be able to do it. But if you are sort of wandering around aimlessly, wondering what to do, this is not a particularly energetically supportive space.
You're totally right. And I have to say, in that first year that I was here, I spent a lot of time just wandering around. I mean, walking around Paris is absolutely amazing, but there was a lot of walking around, and there was a lot of actually getting on trains to go to places outside of Paris, and lots of walking around there too by myself, thinking, and I guess being on that sort of search. And so I put myself back in New Zealand, took myself to New Zealand, I should say, and I ended up actually just spending 14 to 15 months there doing, I think, some healing and some deconditioning from things that no longer served me, or maybe never served me, and adding to the things that I felt maybe had been talking to me for a long time, but I hadn't really given myself full permission to listen to them, or to indulge in what they maybe were, or I'd said, no, that's not me, or whatever.
Right.
I think also I had a Christian upbringing, nothing super, super strict, but I went to nearly my whole schooling was done at an Anglican school, and I take a lot of my values from Christianity. And I think that exploring the spiritual world, which wasn't necessarily aligned with Christianity, felt something very unknown to me, and also was, I think, in times of again feeling a bit lost, I felt myself drawn back to a community, a Christian community, whether it was singing in a choir or visiting churches or whatever. And so I felt that this sort of, what I want to say, slightly different way of having faith, and looking at God as differently to how I'd looked at God before, looking now at God more as a force that's just bigger than myself, the universe. Some people might want to refer to this as Mother Nature or whatever. I suddenly was like, this is very unknown, and I don't know. Is this me? Is this not me? Can I talk about this to other people? In the end, I really let my excitement towards cacao actually decide that for me, because I feel like it taught me a lot, which we obviously can dive into a bit more, the spiritual connection.
I love Paris for all of its myriad of options of things to do throughout each and every day. However, it can get a little overwhelming sometimes to figure out what you want to do because there's so much to do. If you're in this position, I highly recommend you listen to Don't Miss This with Jennifer Garrity. She gives you the best of what is going on in Paris for each particular week. It is definitely something I listen to every Sunday, so go and check it out at parisundergroundradio.com. We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio.
So I, to this day, I still teach Pilates, and I do lots of things that are very science-based wellness, but I now combine this with a very spiritual, holistic connection with other modalities of wellness and spiritual sciences, if I can call them that. And I find that I feel like this has given me that extra layer that I think I felt was lacking before, which is really the means for people, myself and others, to connect in with themselves.
That's so beautiful. And that is actually, something that is super important, especially now, given the fact that there has been a lot of this separation. And I truly believe that the separation in regards to all of the pandemic stuff has been as a result of us not looking within, right? So it actually gave us that time to look within and to really work on ourselves. And you're definitely not the first person to mention that your spiritual awakening kicked into high gear during that time. And you're certainly not going to be the last, because I know there are a ton of people out there that have similar stories about that particular period of time. I also want to mention to everyone listening right now, when Ally was talking about human design, I just want to make note that we did do an episode about human design last season. So if you go back to season 2, I believe it is episode 24, you can listen to an episode all about human design. The really beautifully aligned part of all of this is the woman, Josette, that I interviewed for that episode. She actually does not do personal sessions. She only does trainings for other people who are wanting to get into human design. So as a side note, if you are looking for somebody after listening to that episode to do a human design session with you, please do not hesitate to contact Ally, and we'll go over all of her contact information at the end of the episode. Okay, so that gives us some context as to where you found your passion for cacao ceremonies, which is super, super exciting to dive into, like the history of them. So tell us what your experience was when you went down to Mexico and everything you learned.
So cacao ceremonies have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And so we're thinking the Mayan and Aztec cultures in Central and South America, and yes, Mexico. And they were used for all sorts of spiritual, medicinal, ceremonial purposes connected to, yes, your inner awakening, creative guidance. And the earliest ceremonies provided the community an opportunity to come back into harmony. And actually, that really is such an overall theme with cacao in general. Cacao, in a way, you could say, represents harmony. It represents balance. It represents the balance between masculine and feminine energies, everything like that, as well as a time to give thanks. Give thanks to Mother Nature, to the seasons. Give thanks to our ancestors, people who've come before us, that wisdom give thanks to the people who prepared the cacao. It was all about that, yes, that coming together to bring back harmony, to connect with ourselves, those around us, those who've come before us, and a time to pray, to ask for blessings, to pray to what's often called as the cacao spirit, mother cacao.
Mm.
And so these days, cacao ceremonies are slightly different. I mean, back then at that time also, cacao really was used as a medicine. We're thinking 100%, like just the cacao mixed in with these spices and some water, and that's it. And so it was used as medicine. And actually, when the Europeans came over and discovered cacao, they did recognize that this had a spiritual connection as well, and that it wasn't some just sort of like hocus pocus. Because they also, Europeans being Catholic at the time as well, they recognized the importance of like the bread and the wine. So they actually looked at cacao with respect and then decided to take it back to Europe and then turn it into something completely different, but that's okay. And they turned it into something very delicious, but very different from where it started, right? Very different from being actually like a health drink to I think there's definitely and I talk about this lots in my hot chocolate club, which was more hot chocolate as opposed to cacao, which is what I predominantly would use now. I would talk about there's definitely a place in our lives for good hot chocolate that definitely comes into part of a balanced diet, balanced life, but it definitely is a different thing to ceremonial cacao and drinking it in its more purest or simplest form.
Sure.
So I learned a lot about the origins of the ceremony and the reason why they had it. And, those cultures, they spent a lot of time building temples as well that were used as places to give thanks and to celebrate, especially plant spirits. They definitely believe that, food is medicine. And when we have any sort of imbalance, that it's all about coming back and connecting, and that, we have the answers within the body. Cacao, and you may have heard of this before, the relationship between chocolate and the heart. Cacao is what's known as a heart opener.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And this is because, as we know, when we consume chocolate, we feel good, right? It produces the same sort of sensations of being in love and of that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah, it is, I guess, the item of choice whenever anyone goes through a breakup, right? Like that's what everybody does.
Yes, exactly. Just in that craving of chocolate, and it's just that happiness that you get afterwards. Like I have referred to before, I've been a chocoholic for a long time, and I definitely need that daily dose of heart medicine, let's just say that. But from an actual scientific perspective, this is why they say, oh, chocolate's good for your heart, which of course has become like a marketing slogan, if you like. It's because it does actually help to widen the blood vessels that lead to the heart. And so it can make people feel more relaxed, and it creates space. And if you even want to look at this from a more metaphoric view as opposed to literal, if we think about life and going through life with an open heart, that conjures up a sort of image, doesn't it? And I think that again relates back to the connecting in with others with an open heart, connecting with yourself with an open heart, and this really enables people to be creative and to, I think, tap into, yes, creative wisdom and again, connect back into the wisdom of those who've gone before us.
That's so incredible because as you're speaking of this and talking about the healing properties and how it opens the heart, I'm thinking from an energetic basis too. When you're saying, if you walk around with your heart open, life just sort of unfolds before you. And if you walk around with your heart closed and you're constricted, you're basically going to come up with resistance in most places in your life. So let's say if you went through a breakup and you're craving that chocolate, so not only is it seemingly like a self-soother, but it also enables you to not close your heart completely if you've been hurt, right? So it allows you to keep your heart open at least just a little bit in order to begin that healing process.
Definitely. Definitely. And I think it's hard because often when we do connect in and listen to ourselves, we end up maybe hearing things that we don't want to hear. And I think there comes, we're on our own timeline as well. And maybe we don't necessarily need to take action on what we hear our body potentially telling us. But I think there is always a place for kindness towards ourselves and being able to have a tool, if you like cacao, which is there to be a comforter as well as be a connector. Yeah, it's something very powerful that is, and we can talk about this a bit more, but we're able to consume it in ceremony with others, but also is able to be incorporated into a daily ritual to help support people. And cacao itself has many therapeutic properties. And I mean, it's great in your diet. It's great also to help support women's well-being, but it also does have properties that help to support people who maybe are going through something a little bit, you could say, traumatic or a healing journey, or maybe are coming off something that's been a bit addictive and they're trying to find something to support them on their whatever journey they're on. Cacao is a great tool for all of this.
So that's a really good segue to kind of talk about if you are going to integrate this into a daily practice. What is the difference between, just regular chocolate that we consume and cacao? Because I can hear people out there listening right now saying, "Oh, I have a daily chocolate practice already."
Don't we all? Life is better that way. So when it comes to so really actually the main difference between cacao and chocolate is actually the temperature that it's roasted to. If you take cacao above 40 to 50 degrees Celsius, it really becomes a different substance. It loses a lot of its original flavors. So if those listening have had cacao before, whether it's like a bean to bar, chocolate bar, which again hasn't been over roasted, or whether you've just had ceremonial cacao or however you've had your cacao, you will be able to taste what they say is the fruity notes of the jungle or the plants that it grew around. When it's roasted above 50 degrees, it loses a lot of that. And also, from a biochemistry perspective, it loses a lot of those really good enzymes and antioxidants. That is what makes cacao basically a superfood. So it does actually change form. Chocolatiers, especially these days, are very good at what is called over roasting the cacao to give it that real chocolate taste, and then adding in other things that make it taste differently delicious, like vanilla and extra cocoa butter and all of these things that make it very, very yum, but are used to actually disguise potentially below par cacao beans that they have acquired.
Interesting.
So really, the higher you roast the cacao, the less, I guess, beneficial it is for your health. And obviously, if you add in a whole lot of other things, you can obviously create many, many wonderful, delicious things. But yes, it's a slightly different food really than the cacao itself. You also can extract the fat out of the cacao, which means that you're left with then two substances, right? You're left with the cacao butter, and then you're left with the cacao powder. And you can consume the powder in many different ways, like, for example, in a smoothie, or mixing it into, I don't know, any sort of baking you're doing as a drink itself. But without the fat, it loses, again, quite a few nutritional properties, but it does have a crazy amount of antioxidants in it. In fact, it has the most antioxidants of any food that exists on this planet. So again, it comes back to being a very therapeutic and nourishing, full of nutrition. It's fantastic.
Are you fascinated with all of the different terroirs or the various different regions of France and the cheese and the wine and all of the gastronomy that comes from each territory? If so, this is the podcast for you. It is the Terroir Podcast with Caroline Connor and Emily Monaco. Head to parisundergroundradio.com. We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. It sounds like the homeopathic benefits are so much more than most people would even recognize in, let's say, your general, let's say, cocoa powder that you get at the grocery store. And when you get those things and they say, 70% chocolate or 90% chocolate, does it really matter? Are they still over roasting those beans?
So I actually recently did a chocolate course, a bean to bar chocolate course, and I learned so much more about this. Obviously, the higher it is in percentage, the less sugar it has. And that really is all that is telling you, is that it just has less sugar. Because if you take a supermarket brand, say, of, let's say, 90% chocolate, yes, it will have less sugar in it, but it may also, if you flip over and read the ingredients, it may have cocoa butter added to it, like extra cocoa butter. It may have vanilla, all these other things you maybe can't pronounce added to it as well. And yes, that is normally used to give it that real chocolate taste that I think most of us grew up enjoying. When you think about chocolate, you think about that sort of, I want to say, commercial chocolate taste. That's sort of quite common across most, supermarket brands, let's say. Whereas if you had something which is, more artisan, more what is really bean to bar, it really should only have the cacao, which is called cacao liquor normally, and sugar. And it doesn't matter how much sugar you put in it, it's still bean to bar, it just will be sweeter. And it can have some cocoa butter added to it as well. It will make it sort of more creamy, more fatty. In a well done bar, it should taste unique. It should taste, again, you should be able to taste the jungle from it.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot like coffee beans. It's a lot like wine, where it takes the elements from, as we say here in France, the terroir. It's what it takes from the soil and the environment where it's grown, right? And it's interesting that you were mentioning that chocolate taste that we kind of crave and that we look for. Because I had a job a long time ago. This was back in my 20s when I was living in Chicago. And it just so happened that the office that I worked in downtown was a couple blocks away from a chocolate factory. And so, I would go to work every morning just smelling this enormous smell of chocolate. And my coworker and I used to always go and try to find something that would taste the way that smelled, because even if we had that chocolate from the chocolate factory, it never tasted like it smelled. And we were always trying to search for that chocolate taste as you smell it. So it makes so much sense to me the way you're describing it, that there are those big differences, right?
There are, and actually introducing people to even like very high quality bean to bar chocolate blocks, and then obviously cacao itself, can be quite a process, because I think we get very attached to those tastes that we have from childhood and from, we've got memories of our favorite chocolate bars and what that tastes like. And actually not over roasting chocolate does taste very, very different. But then it's one of those things that once you've gone that way, you can't go back.
Sure. Yeah. Well, okay. So this is sort of a question that is more on a personal note, but I know it will speak to a lot of people out there who are on their spiritual awakening, because as you and I have talked about, when you go on this journey, I shouldn't say when you go, when you embark on this journey, when the journey is finding you.
Yes.
You go through various different changes within your body and diet, and there are certain things you can eat and drink, and there are certain things that you can't anymore. I've gone through various bouts of not being able to drink wine, not being able to eat cheese, not being able to do any of these things, which was horrific given the fact that I had just moved to France. And
Yes, good.
Yeah. The one thing right now, and actually, I think that this is going to be a permanent thing for me, is that I cannot drink caffeine. It's just not something I can ingest. My body cannot handle it anymore. Whereas I used to. I was a barista for a very long time when I was in college and loved everything about coffee, learned everything about coffee, but then realizing that I can't have the caffeine. So I drink decaf now. I can have like 1 cup per day and that's it. That would be a concern that I would have in regards to the cacao is there a lot of caffeine? How is my body going to react to it?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So there is some caffeine in cacao, but what makes cacao different is that it has something else in it called theobromine. So really, it's about the ratio between theobromine and caffeine. So the ratio in good cacao, and in particular the ceremony cacao that I use, is quite huge. So there is so much more theobromine in it than there is caffeine. And theobromine has a very different effect on the nervous system because caffeine, the reason why it's such a stimulant, because theobromine is also a stimulant, so caffeine affects your central nervous system, which is why it's so sort of immediate, and then also kind of has that like, whoop, we're alert, and now we're finished that spike of energy, and becomes, I guess, somewhat addictive. And we really do feel it. Well, sorry, I can't really speak from experience because I've never had a coffee in my life, but I know what energy spikes feel like. Whereas theobromine, like I said, it's similar to caffeine in that it's a stimulant. It gives that similar uplifting feeling that can make your heart rate slightly increase, but it dilates the blood vessels, which again comes back to it being that heart opening medicine, warms up the body, everything like that. But unlike caffeine, which impacts the central nervous system, theobromine acts more on the peripheral nervous system, which means it's a lot less aggressive as a stimulant. And it means that people don't have that same like come down that they do with caffeine. It's not overstimulating, and it's more supportive in that way, and not so addictive either. So yeah, it's a really supportive drink, but the amount of caffeine is really small in comparison. So yes, you can't say there isn't caffeine in cacao, but there isn't unless you are overdosing, over-consuming, getting high on cacao, as I like to say. You're not going to have that same intense hit, if you like, than a cup of coffee.
For example, decaffeinated coffee still has a small amount of caffeine, right? So, I mean, you're never going to find a decaffeinated, well, I shouldn't say never. You're rarely going to find a decaffeinated coffee that doesn't have at least a small amount of caffeine. So just as a sort of a caveat here for anyone out there who is wanting to try Cacao Ceremony, just so you know that is a factor. For some people, if they're being called to not have caffeine, it sounds like the beneficial properties are sort of outweighing any sort of potential, as you said, energy spike, Ally. However, I will say that for me personally, I am in a place now where I feel like I could do something like this and it wouldn't affect me. It would actually affect me in a positive way, as opposed to when I was smack dab in the middle of my spiritual awakening, where every time I had a cup of coffee with caffeine, it would actually induce a panic attack. And that was because my nervous system was already so heightened because of the spiritual awakening process, because of everything that I was going through, all of the shadow work, all of the purging, all of the everything that was happening, that, adding that extra stimulant for me it was like one little notch too much for me. So use your guidance. And I would just recommend that, you check in before you do something like this, just to make sure that it is something that is right for you.
Oh, totally. And on that note, in a ceremony, normally I do ask people if, what their sort of, health and wellness state is, if you like, how their well-being is, if they also have any medical conditions, because like anything, there are often contraindications. I talk about this a lot with Pilates about, when people are pregnant or they've got injuries, all that sort of stuff. It's the same with consuming something like cacao. It is something which, again, is most of the time perfectly safe, and I encourage nearly anybody and everybody to give it a go. But there are certain situations where there's just a bit more caution should be used. An example, just on the top of my head, is it can interfere with some people's antidepressant medication, but normally it's only certain types of antidepressants. So again, like I would ask somebody if they were taking some sort of medication, what it was. Again, I would ask, if a woman was pregnant or was breastfeeding. Again, normally something like that, you would just have like a lower dose, but it's just really good to know these things. Again, if someone's on blood pressure medication, those types of things. So this is again, which I really love learning about in my facilitator course, which was very scientific based as well. We really learned about cacao as a plant medicine. And so, of course, all this stuff, this is science, isn't it? This is the body interacting with things that have impact on the brain and on the heart as well. And something quite interesting just on the topic of food is that cacao itself can really be mixed with both things. However, it is recommended to not mix cacao with dairy because it is seen as something very detoxifying, and anything that links the heart and the liver, these organs together, shouldn't then add something which can be a bit of a load. And dairy is actually a little bit of a load on the liver. So they recommend not, if you're going to have a milk with your cacao, to use a plant-based milk and not a dairy-based milk.
Oh, that's good to know. So let's dive right into what somebody can expect in a cacao ceremony.
So these days, you really can do whatever you want. I think what's beautiful about this is that as long as people are giving, the facilitator is somehow giving a place of thanks and reverence to a bit of the history and to the origins and to the meaning of the story of cacao, its significance, its spiritual relevance. What actually happens in a ceremony is very dependent on where you're doing it, who you're doing it with, which is very cool because again, I can compare it even to like a Pilates or a yoga class. It really depends on the instructor, which is fantastic. And we can be suited to lots of different types of groups or communities. Maybe it's just a women's community, or maybe you have both men and women here. Whether or not you want people to also talk and share throughout the ceremony, or whether or not it's more of a meditation time and people are going really deep within and maybe doing some journaling. So many different things could happen. But let's go through some quite common ones. So because cacao is a connecting tool, it is great to start a ceremony with an intention. And this intention can be set by the facilitator or the host of the ceremony. But often the facilitator may go around the circle, because you sit in a circle, and ask people why they're there. Why have you come today? What are you wanting to connect with? What do you feel you're needing to connect with? And I think this idea is so lovely because it's something that I think with any sort of ritual that we have also in our life, it's like living life with intention. Like, why do we do things? Not just going through life on autopilot. And I think this is a great way to get people into thinking again like that. Like, why am I here?
Yeah.
What am I wanting out of this? And then, moving that to how you go about your life. Why, like I said, why you do the things you do every day. And if they're not serving you, then maybe you need to change them.
If you're enjoying this episode of The Heart of You, you may enjoy our sister podcast, Life in Diasporis, which attempts to understand what it means to be Black in a European country in the 21st century through enlightened and thoughtful discussions. Listen now to Life in Diasporis on Paris Underground Radio. We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio.
often you will start with that. Maybe you'll start with a prayer, again, a prayer of reverence, giving thanks. And then from there is the sharing of the cacao. So it's the pouring out of the cacao. Often I would ask people who are coming to bring their own mug. I think there's something quite nice also about having it in your own mug. It's not always able to be done in your own mug, but I think it's quite nice to have your special cacao cup, if you like.
Oh yeah. I mean, I right now I'm just like, oh yes, I'm gonna go get one now. Like,
Yeah. And like I said before, you sit in a circle, and so the person leading the ceremony, let's just say at the front, may in front of them have a selection of items that make up what's called an altar. And traditionally, you'd want an item that symbolizes each element: earth, air, fire, and water. An example of these could be, for example, for air, you could have a feather. You also have a tool called a molinillo, which is this whisk that whisks the cacao, whisks the spirit of the cacao, the breath of life, if you like, into the cacao. That when someone is preparing cacao, they use this beautiful traditional whisk tool. And so that is often associated with the element of air. So you may have one of those present on the altar. Then you could have a candle to represent fire. For the earth, we've got maybe some cacao beans, cacao itself. We've got water. Water is obviously in the cacao. There are a few different things. The burning of sage as well. That's also quite a common practice, is at the beginning of ceremony, or when people come in for the ceremony to be saged. Again, to cleanse the air, the energy, etc. So that's quite a common practice. And yes, then they may have a sort of cauldron, or sometimes I've gone to ceremonies where they just have a whole lot of big thermos flasks there with the cacao, so they can pour it easily. I guess it depends how many people are there. And then there's you come and receive the cacao, or sometimes people go and distribute it, and then just throughout the ceremony in your own time, you mindfully consume it. And again, it's sort of smelling it, it's feeling it as it travels through your body. How does your heart feel? Again, that connection in with yourself. And then after this, the ceremony, like I keep saying, can really go anywhere. So it could be a ceremony that's more used to help support people on a sort of meditative healing journey. It could be something which then is followed by movement, yoga, aesthetic dance. It becomes like a kind of cacao dance party, that sort of thing. And there actually are different cacaos that also biochemically can support this as well. Like maybe you're wanting to do a ceremony that includes some breath work or some movement or something a little bit more energetic. There's actually cacaos that are best used for that, to help support that. Whereas there are other cacaos that are used more to help that feeling of awakening and connecting within, for a slightly inward journey type ceremony with some meditation, maybe a sound bath. So it's very common to go to a ceremony which is, I want to say, sort of multifaceted, if you like. There is maybe some other things that go on as well as just the drinking of the cacao. Also telling stories, maybe talking about what's going on astrologically at the time, doing some journaling, all sorts of things.
so when you're about to facilitate a particular ceremony, and let's say you've put out the email and the invitation, and do you actually determine some of these things prior to sending out the invitation for the event, or is this all sort of co-created with everyone who has decided to go to the ceremony, and do you just sort of follow the energy of everyone that's there, or is it determined ahead of time?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I definitely think that, a ceremony ends up being what it's meant to be. So definitely to a certain extent it can go, yeah, like I said, where the energy on the day takes you, where the energy of the people who come takes it. But no, normally what I do is I would set a theme, or set a sort of, yes, I guess, intention, or what the purpose is. So, like, for example, it's very common for there to be cacao ceremonies around times of transition. So maybe we've got full moon, new moon. That's a very common time where people will come together, maybe for an eclipse as well, or the equinox, those types of times. And so you could base a ceremony around something like that. And then maybe that would be a time where you do discuss a little bit about what's going on and what people may be feeling or what's come up for them in the last month. So you could say that we're going to discuss this, and maybe bring your journal, and we can also, what I also like to do, and again, this is because I work a lot with women, it's like a cacao focused women's circle. So again, there's a place to share, but I would state that in advance so people would know that if they were coming along, not that anyone ever needs to share or speak, but that there will be a time for that, for people to listen and for people to share their truth, etc. And yes, if it was something where there was going to be some movement or some dance or whatever, Pilates, then I would state that as well. So I don't like people to feel like they have no idea what to expect. But then, like I said at the beginning, these things take you where they're meant to take you.
Yeah. Well, and because I can imagine that if let's say I wanted to go to a ceremony, let's say that had the dance portion, and I was in that particular energy, but yet somebody else wanted to do some serious releasing and inner work, that would need to be sort of stated as an intention beforehand. Because if you're going expecting to do inner work and it's a bit more of a movement vibe, and sort of focusing on the external body as opposed to internal, then you might actually not get as much out of it as you would have if it was aligned with what your particular intention was.
For sure. And one of the first ceremonies I ever went to also had breath work in it, and it had sound healing. And I can tell you, the energy in the room that day, you could tell that a lot of people had gone there for the purpose of healing. And especially during the breath work part of it, a lot of things were going down in that room. And I think if people didn't feel that they had turned up to a safe environment where other people would understand that that's what they were going through, then it would have been a very, very different sort of ceremony. But you could really see here that people had come for healing, and they were really letting themselves go, which was fantastic to see people be able to do that. But I also know that idea could be very intimidating to some people. And so maybe that's not the first cacao ceremony that I would introduce someone to. Introduce them maybe more to something, maybe a little bit more educational, where I would actually talk more about the history of cacao, and maybe tell stories and introduce them more to other sort of spiritual sciences, and talk about more astrology and human design or something like that, as opposed to something a little bit more emotional. Because also when we add things like movement and music, the impact that can have emotionally on us. I've been to events, whether it's cacao ceremonies or ecstatic dance, where afterwards I have felt so strongly. And I think if you're not prepared for that, or you've never had that experience before, then you'd need some sort of support, I think, as well.
Yeah, because movement it's that release valve, right? So it's like you do the inner work, and that movement is basically dislodging all of that sort of energy that no longer serves you and bringing it up to the surface. So you have to be prepared for that.
You do, yes. And again, like, there's so much anxiety, isn't there, around the unknown. And I think that, I talk with some of my friends now, and it's like, oh, we're going to go along to this. I wonder what's going to come up this time, It's like, oh, what's going to come up this time? Because, it's powerful work, but, emotions is energy in motion. So if we are able to move these things through the body, through, like you were saying, like through movement or for whatever, then it really is, it comes to the surface, and it comes out in whatever way it decides it's going to, whether that's laughing, crying.
Already, you have my wheels turning now, because we actually, for those of you who don't know, we have a group here in Paris called the Divine Feminine Spiritual Circle. And if you're interested in joining it, you can look it up on Facebook. I could see us all coming together at some point and just creating just a really beautiful space for something like this. So yeah, we'll have to talk about doing that at some point.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also a lovely, beautiful thing about cacao, and is that it is something that's, it's here for connecting, collaboration. That we should definitely talk more about this.
Definitely. We'll keep everybody posted once this comes together. The last question I have is in regards to the ceremonial aspect of it, because you've gone over a lot of the sort of ritual of it and everything else. And I think that the word ceremony has a particular connotation to it. So especially with ayahuasca being super popular right now and people think about ayahuasca ceremonies. So I wanted to sort of clarify if there is any like hallucinogenic property. Is there any sort of like commonality with ayahuasca, or is it just, completely separate? And the ceremony part of it is obviously the ceremony, but like I said, it has this connotation nowadays.
It definitely does. So without getting too sort of jargony with the actual sort of scientific differences, if you like, cacao is often used in combination with say psychedelics because of this heart opening effect. And so it actually provides a more, let's use the word, supportive experience for other plant medicines. Yes, plants like ayahuasca, etc. But it is not a psychedelic itself. So it's sort of like its best friend, but it's missing a component that means that it doesn't have, it biochemically doesn't have a certain inhibitor that enables that to happen.
Got it.
But it's sort of like a precursor. It sort of works in similar pathways, like dopamine pathways. It's got tryptophan in it, which gets converted into tryptamine, and that then leads to another biochemical, which does have this sort of psychoactive effect, if you like. But if you want to think about psychedelics being like a mind opener, then the cacao is the heart opener, and it supports the mind opening experiences, if you like, and it does have this mindfulness effect, this awakening in it, but it's more the awakening as opposed to a psychoactive state. You can have what's called cacao dreams, which is sort of very vivid dreams experienced after a cacao ceremony or after just taking a certain amount of cacao, depending on how your intolerance to cacao, I guess. Which again is the levels of these certain biochemicals that peak overnight, which enables this sort of dream state. But it's like I said, it's sort of like a precursor because of these increased levels, but it doesn't have the ability to actually by itself take you to that sort of like tripped out level, if that makes sense.
Right. Whether you live in France or whether you're just trying to learn French, sometimes navigating the nuance of the vocabulary can be daunting. Navigating the French is a podcast that explores each one of these nuances that will help you integrate the language into your everyday vocabulary and help you understand the history of that word or concept. Emily Monaco is a delight to listen to. So head over to Paris Underground Radio, Navigating the French. We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. And that's good to know because, some people are guided to take things like ayahuasca and some people are not. It just depends on what the trajectory of your journey is. So, for example, I've never been guided to do ayahuasca. I've been told I don't need to do it. I have had clients where it has been recommended that they do it. So it is a very personal experience for everybody. And so it sounds like this would be a beautiful precursor to, even if you are being guided to do an ayahuasca ceremony, to do a cacao ceremony first and, just sort of get into that energy.
Yes, definitely. Again, just think Just think of cacao as being like your cuddly, supportive friend, I think.
I love that.
Whether or not you're consuming it as something to use as a healing port, whether or not, yes, like you were saying, like you're feeling guided towards something like ayahuasca and you're wanting a little bit more of a sort of a tester first, or I don't know, whatever your kind of calling or journey is at the moment. I think it's something that is just a very supportive substance.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you, Ellie, for joining me today on the show. It's been super interesting and enlightening about cacao ceremonies. And I'm so much looking forward to not only joining one of your ceremonies, but also seeing how we can work together.
Me too. I'm very excited as well. And also just, yes, bringing people together through the power of cacao in Paris.
So if any of you are living in the Paris area and would like to join us for one of these cacao ceremonies, you can reach Ally at allymcdonaldbull.com. So it's ALLYMCDONALDBULL.com. And also you can follow her on Instagram at Ally McDonald-Bull. And Ally, is there any other social media handles that you need to let us know about?
I don't think so. If you happen to want to do Pilates, you can also do Ally McDonald-Bull on YouTube. But other than that, I normally send out a newsletter every week, which if you go onto the website, you can sign up to at the bottom of the homepage. And that is another way that I connect with people is through the newsletter in terms of what events are on that week that I may be doing. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. And then also, if any of you are interested in getting a human design reading, you can also contact Ally in regards to that. And I'm assuming, Ally, they don't have to be in Paris for that. That can be done remotely, correct?
That's correct. Yes, I do have a little bit more information about that also on my website about the different options. It can be written, it can be on Zoom. And yes, if you're in Paris, of course, it can be face to face. So, yeah, lots of options there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for listening, and I would like you to make sure you head over to parisundergroundradio.com and send some love to some of our other fellow podcasters on the network. Also, make sure to check out our Patreon if you would like to support the network. There is all sorts of extra content that Jennifer Garrity is putting out for the network. So please consider giving as little as $5 a month to support the channel. It would really help. And then also don't hesitate to rate this podcast. It also helps me and the show, as well as our guests like Ally, to get a bit more exposure. If you would like to reach me, you can reach me at infinitesoullove.com. You can also reach me on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Infinite Soul Love 1111.
This episode of The Heart of You was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please join us on Patreon.